So I suppose the webinar this morning will focus on the major foodborne pathogens, how we can control these. We look at some case studies relating to foodborne pathogens in food facilities, and we'll also discuss cleaning and hygiene specifically for small food businesses. So our first speaker today is Dr. Linda Gordon from Safe Food. Linda is Chief Specialist in Food Science and has extensive experience in food microbiology. Linda will be followed by Dr. Kieran Jordon, who is Managing Director of Jordon Food Safety. Kieran previously worked in the Food Safety Department at Teagasc Moore Park, and like Linda, has extensive experience in food microbiology. He particularly has a lot of research experience working with pathogenic E. coli and Listeria. And our final speaker is Eddie O'Neill, who is consultant at O'Neill Food Solutions. Eddie was the artisan food specialist in Teagasc for many years, and he has vast experience working with small food businesses with problem solving, product development, equipment, and packaging development. So I suppose just Tracy's already said all participants' microphones and cameras have been switched off for this webinar, but as Tracy said, feel free to ask a question in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, and we'll get to these at the end of all three presentations. So Linda's presentation will begin now, so I'll ask all the other panelists if you would turn off your cameras and microphones, please, until you're ready to speak. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Mairead, and good morning, everyone. I'm just going to give a little bit of an introduction to food poisoning bacteria and what food businesses need to know about preventing them from getting into your premises and controlling their spread. So, first of all, just in terms of the responsibilities of people who sell food or serve food to the public, and when things can go wrong, they can go quite badly wrong. This is an example of a case that was in the papers a few years ago. It happened in the UK, where a number of people became ill at a hotel after eating on Christmas Day. In fact, one person died, and then subsequently there were prosecutions, and the chef and the manager were jailed. So I mean, this is obviously the worst case scenario or an extreme example, but just that there is accountability on those who are responsible for producing food and for ensuring that that food is safe, and that when things go badly wrong, as they did clearly in this case, people are held accountable for it. Other headlines that we've seen over the last number of years, I think most people will remember a few years ago there was a salmonella outbreak associated with a Dublin pub. I think it was a First Communion party possibly, and sadly one person died. It's quite rare. I suppose we don't see a lot of deaths from food poisoning, thankfully, but it does happen. And especially if there's a large number of cases, then you may have a person that's particularly vulnerable and may become very seriously ill as a result of that. So we tend to see food poisoning as, it's, vomiting and diarrhea for a day or two and then you're grand. And, for most people, they will recover. It'll be self-limiting and they'll recover without need for medical treatment. But for some people, it can be very serious. And obviously, if you're producing food that's being distributed around the country or being exported, across, say, the EU or something, then the potential is there for the companies to infect large numbers of people. So how many people get sick from food? And that's a difficult question to answer, because we know that most people who become ill from eating contaminated food probably don't go to the doctor. So in order for a case to be officially notified or reported, somebody would have to go to the doctor would have to take a sample, which is then tested, and then that result then reported to, for example, the Health Protection Surveillance Centre, or other public health authorities, in order for that to be recorded. So we do know that the true number of cases is many times the actual reported number. But just looking at data that's available from WHO for the European region, they say every minute 44 people fall sick from eating contaminated food, and 4,007 people per year lose their lives. So again, as I said, the true number of cases is unknown. In 2018, EU member states reported a total of 5,146 foodborne outbreaks affecting over 48,000 people. Now that relates to outbreaks alone, where there's a number of cases relating to it, and there will be also other sporadic one-off cases that don't really come to attention because maybe only one person has become ill. We don't really hear about it unless there's large numbers of people affected. So that's just to put in context why somebody who is working on producing food or selling food, whether it's in a cafe or a restaurant or a deli counter or a food producer or a processor, why you need to understand something about food microbiology and food safety. So in terms of bacteria, at the most basic level, they're very small. They have to be magnified 1,000 times in order to see them. We can't see them with the naked eye, so that is what makes them quite difficult to detect. Things may look clean and the food may look perfect and everything may look very nice, but you may still have harmful bacteria present. There are some harmful bacteria and pathogens, is the technical term we use for those, and others obviously are not harmful, and others are beneficial, and people will be using them in producing cheese and yogurt and all kinds of things. So it's really just the harmful bacteria from a food safety point of view that we're interested in. So bacteria are one of the most common causes of food poisoning. Unlike food spoilage bacteria, food poisoning bacteria do not affect the taste, smell, or look of food. So you can't tell. I know a lot of people use kind of the sniff test to see if their food has gone off or not. That might tell you whether or not it's been spoiled, whether the flavor or texture or a smell of the food has been affected, but it won't tell you if there are food poisoning bacteria present at numbers that may cause illness. So the ways that they can cause problems are you can have transfer from raw to ready-to-eat foods due to poor handling and storage practices. So that's why there's such an emphasis on separating raw and ready-to-eat foods. You could have transfer onto foods from food handlers, from pests, or from dirty equipment and utensils. If food is undercooked or if a process such as pasteurization is not done properly, bacteria can survive and then they can grow subsequently in that food as well. And they can grow in food that's not stored at the correct temperature. So again, that's all about your chilling and hot holding and all of these things, all the reasons why you have to take all your temperature measurements and keep such careful records of temperature control. So bacteria can grow to very high numbers in a short period of time if they're given the right conditions. So every 30 minutes, the number of bacteria can double, and they just simply divide in a very simple way. So one bacterium can get to millions of bacteria in 12 hours based on that 30 minutes doubling time. So you can see there, the images at the bottom show how quickly bacteria can multiply, and you can get to high numbers very quickly. And the conditions that they need to grow, temperature is probably one of the most important ones. So when we refer to the temperature danger zone of 5 degrees to 63 degrees, that's the zone in which harmful bacteria will grow. So that's why we're trying to keep cold food, below 5 degrees or below, or hot food above 63 degrees. So that's about keeping hot food hot and cold food cold. At a lower temperature, the growth will start to slow down. So again, this all comes back to your storage temperatures, your cooking temperatures, any holding temperatures that you use, chilling, etc. They need a source of nutrients and food, particularly protein-rich foods they like meat and dairy products and things like that. They'll grow very well in those. They need a form of moisture, so that's why very dried foods don't support the growth of bacteria, and then they need to be not very acidic foods, so that's why we use acids and things as food preservatives. So just examples of the main food poisoning bacteria then. Salmonella can cause severe illness. I think that's one that we've all heard of, salmonella. It can cause severe illness in elderly people, infants, and those with impaired immune systems. So I think, over the past year, unfortunately, we've all learned more about those who are more in our society who are more vulnerable to infection. And generally speaking, that is for most infectious diseases, it is the very young, the very elderly, those with immunocompromised, and also pregnant women as well, depending on the type of infection, can be more vulnerable to infectious disease. The symptoms of salmonella poisoning are diarrhea, fever, stomach cramps. It can be life-threatening, again, for those with impaired immune systems. And, when you're talking about small children, their immune systems haven't fully developed. And then as we get older, our immune system is less effective and becomes less efficient. So that's why we're more vulnerable. Symptoms usually appear within 12 to 36 hours, but can be 6 to 72 hours. And I know I often hear people talk about food poisoning. They say to me, but normally if it's food poisoning, you know, surely within 12 hours, or if they become ill, they think, what was the last meal they ate? Or, you know, what was the meal they ate last night if they wake up feeling ill in the morning? And you know, I always say, well, food poisoning isn't one illness. It depends what causes the food poisoning, and you can have quite a significant variation in incubation times. So it may not be the last meal you ate. It may be the meal you ate 2 or 3 days ago. And that's what makes it often quite difficult to trace the source of food poisoning. So salmonella, we would often find them in a wide range of foods, but raw meat and poultry, raw eggs and egg products, they have, you know, usually been associated with. Campylobacter is the most common reported foodborne bacteria on the island of Ireland, and that's true as well, I think, it's across the EU. The symptoms of Campylobacter are fever, headache, feeling unwell, stomach pain, diarrhea, which may be bloody. So symptoms here usually appear within 2 to 5 days of consumption, but it can be even longer than that. It can vary, and, you know, I suppose depend as well on the number of cells that you consume. The Campylobacter is very commonly associated with raw poultry meat. Campylobacter is very well adapted to the environment of the intestine of a chicken. So they are, you know, once they get into a flock, they spread very quickly, and they're very happy to live in that environment. And that's why it's often, you know, it's often poultry that we see Campylobacter associated with. But you also find it from contaminated drinking water and unpasteurized milk. Listeria is another one that, you know, fortunately we don't see very high numbers on the island of Ireland of Listeria poisoning. It's not very common. However, it is very significant because when it occurs, it can cause very severe illness, so that the impact of it can be very significant. And we have seen in other countries in the EU and most recently in South Africa where they have had very significant outbreaks of Listeria associated with particular foods, and large numbers of people have died as a result. So symptoms may not appear for several weeks, so it's more unusual. It has a much longer incubation time. What's also unusual about Listeria and makes it quite tricky is that it can grow at refrigeration temperatures. So we often see it associated with foods that have a long shelf life, certain types of cheeses, things like smoked salmon, those kind of foods that have a long shelf life in the fridge. Small number of cases reported on the island of Ireland, as I said, but can cause very serious illness. The symptoms: fever, nausea, septicemia, meningitis, and it can be particularly harmful for pregnant women and can cause quite severe illness and even miscarriage. So, you know, it's a very significant one, and it's a very important bacterium to control in your food premises. Ready to eat refrigerated and processed foods, as I mentioned, luncheon meat, so, you know, cooked sliced ham and things like that, soft cheeses, smoked seafood, and prepared salads. So those are the foods we most commonly see it, but it can be a problem in a wide range of foods. And I think Kieran would probably give us some examples when he talks to us later on. Virucytotoxigenic E. coli is another one called VTEC or STEC. It's also called, it's the same bacterium. So it's a particular type of E. coli. Most E. coli are harmful, but there are some that cause illness, and it produces a particular type of toxin that can cause quite severe disease. It has a very low infectious dose, which means you only need to eat maybe a few cells of the bacterium in order to become ill. It's more common in children. It's certainly the under 5 age group on the island of Ireland is where we would see most cases. Symptoms: fever, vomiting, stomach pain, and diarrhea, which can be bloody. And then the more serious complications from that are kidney disease, and that sometimes can be fatal. Symptoms usually appear within 1 to 14 days, but it would normally be shorter than 14 days. It was first identified through an outbreak in a burger chain in the US. So it's often associated with raw beef. You know, it lives in the intestines of cattle. So, you know, that's, again, it's an environment that it's quite happy in. So that is why then it can contaminate minced beef, particularly, for example, burgers. And, you know, that's why we would always advise eating and serving burgers cooked the whole way through. And meat products, contaminated water, and unpasteurized milk are also associated with this bacterium. And just a few other examples that we don't think of as often, but Staphylococcus aureus causes a wide range of infections, skin infections, and we've all heard of MRSA and things that people can pick up in hospitals, but it can also cause food poisoning. And it does this by producing a toxin in the food, which is resistant to cooking temperatures. So if bacterium has a chance to grow in the food and then the food is subsequently cooked or reheated, the bacterium may be killed, but the toxin will still be present and people will ingest it and become very ill. And I remember many, many years ago when I was learning about microbiology, an example that was given was of a transatlantic flight, I think, where there was Staphylococcus aureus contamination of something maybe like sliced cooked ham. And a couple of hundred people became ill during the flight with vomiting and diarrhea. And so you can imagine with the limited toilet facilities on a plane, that can't have been very pleasant for anybody. But those kind of extreme examples sometimes help us to remember things and stay in our minds. It certainly stayed with me. Vomiting, diarrhea, nausea, and stomach pain, and symptoms usually appear within 1 to 7 hours. So again, a very short incubation time because the toxin is already produced in the food, and then it can cause illness, pretty soon after you eat it. Food handlers are the main source of Staph aureus because it's often carried on the skin. A lot of people carry it naturally on their skin or in their nasal passages. So again, hand hygiene is so important here, and personal hygiene. Bacillus cereus is another one that we often see associated with rice, and I think that's the one that makes people very wary of reheating rice and things like that. It causes vomiting. It produces heat-resistant spores and toxins, again, that can survive cooking. It causes nausea and vomiting, and again, a very short incubation time for this because it's producing a toxin in the food, and the symptoms can appear within 5 hours. The symptoms are abdominal pain, watery diarrhea, and nausea. Rice, as I said, and rice-based products, cereals, vegetables, herbs, and spices, it has been associated with. Clostridium perfringens, that's another one that grows rapidly at 43 to 46 degrees. It produces heat-resistant spores that survive cooking. The symptoms are abdominal pain and diarrhea. Symptoms usually appear within 8 to 24 hours. The sources can often be found in gravy and cooked meat and casseroles and things like that. It's actually an anaerobic one. It doesn't like oxygen, so it'll be found like deep inside something, that's quite a deep dish, like a casserole or a lasagna or something like that. Again, and a lot of these come down to kind of temperature abuse, foods not being stored at the correct temperatures or not being reheated properly, not going into the fridge, within the 2 hours of cooking and things like that. Clostridium botulinum, and we've all heard of botulism, and we are aware of how severe that can be. It can only grow in the absence of oxygen, and it produces heat-resistant toxins and spores. And it affects the nervous system. This particular type of toxin can cause all kinds of neurological symptoms that are listed there. It can lead to muscle paralysis and damage to nervous system, and death may occur in severe cases. So symptoms appear within 8 to 72 hours. And it's most commonly associated with canned, jarred, and vacuum-packed foods, smoked and salted fish. And I mean, over the years, there have been some very, notable outbreaks of Clostridium botulinum. We don't hear as many outbreaks anymore. Most of the outbreaks that I would hear about, a lot of them are associated with kind of home preserving of foods and home canning and things like that. So again, it is one to be aware of. So what is cross-contamination in terms of how bacteria get around your premises and how you might prevent them from doing that. Cross-contamination is where germs are transferred from one place to another effectively. So you could have raw meat containing food poisoning bacteria. You cut raw meat on a chopping board, the knife, the chopping board, and possibly your hands are now contaminated with the bacteria. And then if you don't wash your hands properly, if you don't clean all your utensils and your surfaces properly, the potential is then if the bacteria could come into contact with ready-to-eat food and be transferred that way. So preventing cross-contamination, some of the main tips are always clean as you go, hand washing, all of these really the basics of food hygiene, using cleaning agents and sanitizers when cleaning, and Ed will talk about that in more detail later on. Keeping, again, the separation between raw and ready-to-eat foods, making sure that you have the space within your premises and have the facilities to actually do that, keep that separation both in storage and in preparation areas. So that's a really important one. And the problem I think that some businesses come up against is that they're maybe expanding quickly and they're trying to increase their output, but they don't really have the facilities and the space to do that properly. So that can be where people kind of come unstuck sometimes. So how does it happen? Again, in a food premises, bacteria can be on your hands, as we've mentioned. It can be in jewelry, tools and equipment, as we said, hair, all of these things, in terms of your personal hygiene and your premises hygiene are so important. They can be found in contaminated water, on the food, and then equipment, even cleaning equipment, if it's not kept clean itself, can cause, can spread. Something like a wet floor sign is you don't really see, but if you're moving that around your premises from one part to another, you could be spreading bacteria from one part of your premises to another, from a cleaner to a high, or from a dirty to a high risk area. So again, on clothes, people's uniforms, shoes, that's why, footwear and things like that are really important to change and make sure that you're not bringing any contamination from outside into your business. Bacteria, as you can see, this is a nice example, a visual example, I suppose, and a way of getting it home to people about the bacteria you can find on your hands. And that's just somebody putting their hand down on an agar plate, and that plate then being incubated, probably 37 degrees for a day or two. And that's what you see. You can see lots of different bacteria and yeasts and molds and things like that as well. So that's what if we don't have good hand hygiene, that's what we're carrying around, on our hands, which we can't see. They may look clean, but you could still have this level of contamination. Hand washing, so washing hands regularly and thoroughly, it's one of the most important things, and hopefully we've all become more aware of the importance of hand washing over the last year or so, and that maybe that will stay with us. So all the times you need to wash your hands before starting preparation, after handling raw meat or poultry, after touching your face or your hair, smoking. There's a whole list of ones there. I won't read them through, but they're all about, and our phones as well. And I think that's when we forget sometimes, we know, most of us know, after going to the bathroom we should wash our hands, but we pick up our phones and touch them so many times during the day, we're not even aware of it. So again, it's just about the awareness of, I've touched my face, I've picked up my phone, I need to go and wash my hands now. Good hand washing facilities include a separate sink specifically for hands, not food prep, so you're not kind of washing on top of food that's nearby. Ideally a touchless tap, a clean soap dispenser, paper towels, and a bin with a foot pedal if possible. So those are minimizing your kind of hand contact surfaces, and providing people with the good proper facilities for hand washing will make it easier for people to do it properly and as frequently as they need to. Areas of the hands most frequently missed. So this just shows you, the thumbs, the tops of the fingers in and around the nails and things like that, in between the fingers as well, can be missed. So it's about doing all of those actions, and getting all of the parts of the hands to make sure that you are washing properly. And it should be taking about 20 seconds to do that rubbing action. Hair is another, potential source of bacteria or cross-contamination. So that's why hairnets are so important, keeping long hair tied back and, wearing a hairnet. One single hair can contain millions of bacteria. You can see in that image there, actually, again, that's putting a hair down on an agar plate and incubating it and seeing what grows. So we don't really think about our hair from that point of view, but it can be a source of bacteria. And then obviously you don't want it getting into your food either. So it's a potential physical contaminant as well. So again, throwing out hairnets, there's no point wearing a hairnet if there's holes in it, when you're wearing the same one all day and it's looking pretty tatty by the end of it. So you need to change it if it gets damaged in any way. And then wash your hands after you change your hairnet, because again, your hands have been in contact with your hair. Jewelry. So again, you see when you put a ring down on an agar plate, what you can find. It's very difficult to clean behind jewelry, so that's why it's better not to wear it, so that your hands will be washed properly. Even after hand washing, bacteria can still be present. Yes, so jewelry can also get into the food, so it's potential physical contaminant too. Again, talking about shoes, particularly for food processing type environment, you know, it's good to have everyday shoes that are worn outside, and then keep that out. Maybe change shoes when you get into a food facility, or have shoe covers. A lot of places will have that. Again, that applies more to a processing type environment. Again, from personal hygiene point of view, nail varnish can chip and get into food. So don't wear it unless you're wearing gloves over it. And again, false nails, definitely don't wear that. You know, we can all see where that's going. Don't wear perfume or aftershave as it can taint a food taste, and then keep makeup to a minimum. So it's really about being aware of, you know, what you've got on yourself that could get into food or could be a source of contamination, and just trying to eliminate that. So food handlers, we've seen a few mentions of that when we were talking about different bacteria like Staph aureus, that people can carry bacteria on their hands, and they can be quite well themselves, but they're just naturally part of their skin microflora. So it's a natural source of infection. The skin cuts and abrasions can become infected. So again, that's really important to make sure that they're covered. And there's other precautions as well around the colour and the metal strip and all of that, to make sure that it's something that can be detected if it gets into food. And again, people will be aware working in a food business that you must report any instances of, you know, gastrointestinal illness like diarrhea, vomiting, or skin infections to a supervisor, and that you shouldn't work when you're suffering from these symptoms, because there is a significant risk of contamination and food becoming contaminated and other people becoming ill as a result. And you must make sure that you're medically well, and you may need to provide medical clearance before going back to work. Again, so that kind of so whistle-stop tour, I suppose, really of food microbiology and food hygiene in a business. So remember, food safety is a shared responsibility. Everyone has a part to play, and I suppose that's very much the ethos of Safe Food, and we try to promote food safety to everybody, including the final consumer. But you know, it's just that everybody working in a food business has a role to play in making sure that the food they're serving and they're selling is safe to eat. So thank you very much for your attention. I will stop my screen share now. And as Mairead said already, we'll do a Q&A at the end. But in the meantime, I will hand you over to my colleague, Kieran Jordon. And both Kieran and Ed are members of the Knowledge Network's expert group. So we're delighted that we have their kind of expertise available to us and to the members of our network. So Ed is going to talk, or Kieran, sorry, is going to talk about different case studies on food safety.
If I unmuted it, it would be a help. Good morning, everyone. I'm going to talk a bit about case studies on food safety. Linda has just covered some generic information about bacteria and showed some incidences that happen to others. And my presentation would be focused on just making people aware that it can happen to you. Of course, it can happen to others, and they're in the newspapers and highlighted on the television and that, but you must remember that it can also happen to you. So I'm going to cover some case studies where food poisoning bacteria were present in food premises, and there was no incidents reported with these case studies, but it was a kind of a preventative measure to address the issues before an incident happened. And I suppose it's no harm to mention the relevance of pathogens in food. I mean, of course, there is a public health concern. People get ill, go to hospital, some people die, and that's a public health concern, and that's a concern with pathogens. But there's also what I refer to as an industry concern, which is recall and withdrawal because of the presence of bacteria, or in some cases with Listeria, it's the possible presence of Listeria. And if you look up some of the recall and withdrawal notices on the internet, of which there are any number, you will see that a lot of them refer to the possible presence of Listeria monocytogenes. So a lot of food is wasted, a lot of reputations damaged because of the possible presence, and that might be just the occurrence of bacteria in the food processing environment. and then there's a risk that it will get into the food. But nobody then goes and tests all the food and sees, has there actually been transfer onto the food? So what they say is it's the possible presence of Listeria. So that's a concern for industry, as I say, because of reputational damage if pathogens are found on your premises, and there's notices gone up with the FSAI and all that kind of thing. It's the reputational damage more than the public health concern, or as much as the public health concern of a possible presence of pathogens. So for that reason, it is worth being aware of the processing environment and having bacteria absent from the processing environment. So I'm going to cover, as I say, a few case studies with different bacteria. These would be, my apologies if you have seen some of these slides before, because I have shown them before. But it's no harm to have a reminder, particularly when it comes to the personal issue, and it can happen to you. It has happened to these people that I'm going to show the case studies of. It's been real life situations where it has happened to people. So it's no harm to see the slides again and be reminded of the fact that these things happen. So the first case study, this is a generic food processing environment. And if you look at the left-hand image on your screen, you see a lot of red X's and green circles. The idea was that we went to a food producing premises to analyze it for Listeria monocytogenes. The food producer told us that they analyze Listeria monocytogenes regularly, but they don't ever find any. So we went into the premises confident enough that we wouldn't find any. But we took 50 samples, and the green circles are where there was a negative result, and the X's, whether they be red or purple or green, don't pay any attention to that. But wherever there was an X, there was a positive result for Listeria monocytogenes. And you can, without counting the X's, you can see there was about 45% positive samples for Listeria monocytogenes in the food premises, where we expected to find none. So we had a little chat with the food business owner. We gave some tips on cleaning, fairly basic ones on paying attention to detail in cleaning, and maybe the use of hydrogen peroxide as a cleaning agent instead of chlorine-based cleaning agents. The food business owner put some of those suggestions into practice, and we went back a month later and took another 50 samples after the corrective actions had been put in place. And you can see that there were very few Listeria monocytogenes present. In the second sampling in October, about a month later, there was 6% of the samples that were positive. So that's shown on the right-hand side of the slide, where the same production facility was tested, and there were only very few samples. That goes to show two things. It goes to show the effectiveness of attention to detail in cleaning, and Ed O'Neill will talk a bit more about that after I'm finished. But it also shows that you have still have 3 positives, even after the attention to detail, and the same 3 X's, they're all red, which indicates that it's the same strain that has survived. And that goes to show the persistence of some bacteria in the production environment, and that continuous attention to detail is needed in order to reduce these. But what it does show is that I would certainly rather have food from the right-hand processing facility, which is in October, rather than from the September one, where there was a lot of Listeria in the processing environment. The risk of cross-contamination from the processing environment onto the food is much less in the second case. So that food from the processing environment in the second case is a safer food product to be eating, and would then certainly go a long way in avoiding cross-contamination, and then also go a long way in towards the prevention of recall and or withdrawal notices. The second case that I want to highlight is some work that we did over a 2-year period, and one of those years, before I said, we did about we'd say 12 samples over the entire year at a number of food processing facilities, and it represents, rather than a once-off study, this represents a continuous study of food processing facilities on a number of occasions over the 2 years. One of the years is shown in grey on the graph, and the other one is shown in blue on the graph. So the first case that I want to highlight is shows that the grey line has surrounded by pink there in the graph. The grey line has almost 15% Listeria monocytogenes samples, positive samples on the first year, and on the second year there were none. So we were interested in that aspect of the elimination of Listeria monocytogenes from 1 year to the next. So we had a discussion with the food business owner and what they had done between the first year and the second year, and we discovered that during the second year they had put a peracetic acid wash through the piping system and let that run onto the floor in order to clean the floor. And I can't say that that caused the reduction in Listeria monocytogenes from 1 year to the next, but it certainly coincided with the reduction from 1 year to the next. And the second case there in the center that I want to draw attention to is an increase in the occurrence of Listeria monocytogenes in the second year. You can see the first year in the gray bar was about 5%, and the second year was above 20%. And that's quite a lot of samples positive in the second year. So again, having a discussion with the food business owner, we realized that during the second year, they were getting in new equipment. And so there were builders going in and out to the premises and that kind of thing. So again, I can't say that that caused the increase in Listeria monocytogenes, but it certainly coincided with an increase in Listeria monocytogenes. So the message from that, from this particular example, is that if you're having repairs or new equipment installed in the premises, just be sure that the area where the new equipment is being put in is completely separated if you want to continue food production. And also builders and repair men or women are putting in equipment, just be conscious that the extra travel in and out can cause an increase in the occurrence of Listeria monocytogenes. I'm not expecting that all of the repair people should be fully gowned up and changing their clothes and change their clothes again if they want to go out to the van for a screwdriver that they forgot. I don't think you need to go to that extent, but just after the installation is done or the repair is done, do a proper and thorough deep clean so that you demonstrate consciousness of the fact that people in and out can carry Listeria monocytogenes around the facility. Now, you might notice that many of the case studies that I'm talking about are to do with Listeria monostogenes, and so that's because that was a common organism in my working life. But don't think that there's anything specific about Listeria monostogenes. I think that if you can get rid of Listeria monostogenes, you can then also get rid of other food poisoning bacteria, and the benefits of attention to detail and cleaning and detergents and all that kind of thing. The benefits will count for other food poisoning bacteria. So even though I'm talking about Listeria monostogenes, the examples will transfer to other food poisoning bacteria because of the, as I say, attention to detail in cleaning and that kind of thing. So even though I'm focusing on Listeria monostogenes, you think of other bacteria as well as Listeria. So the next example that I have is a processing area that was close to a working farm. And it started out that the cheese in the facility was contaminated. There was extensive, in order to try and address this and find out what was going on, there was extensive swabbing of the farm and also the processing facilities. And we were able in the laboratory to do some analysis to show that strains were the same, so that we could show that the hay in the farm had the same strain as the cheese press, the same strain as the drain in the processing room and the floor of the processing room. So the suggestion was that there was a complete cleanup of the operation with improved handling conditions, and I suppose I mean by that with the workflows, so that the raw materials didn't have a chance of getting into contact with the end product food. So your raw materials came in one end and went out the other end. Now I know that that's not possible in some small food processing facilities, but just think that it is important to be conscious of the fact that it can happen and to do as much as you can with regards to workflows. And people flows is another thing. Do people go from a clean area to a dirty area and then back again to the clean area? And again, I know that it's not possible in a small facility where everybody is doing everything, if you like. It's not possible to have a very strict system, but just be conscious of the workflows. And is there really an absolute need for a person to go from a dirty area into a clean area? And that kind of thing. It can be a help with all of that to sit down in the evening and to draw a simple map of the process of your processing facility and put in arrows about where people go and then why do they go there, and to understand the workflows and the product flows from a point of view of cross-contamination. So anyway, in the food processing facility where there was transfer from, or sorry, where there was the same strain in the farm and in the facility, where after the cleanup operation and improved handling conditions, there was no further contamination on the swabs or the cheese. What we kind of assumed from that is that the contamination came from the outside and from the farm area and was brought into the processing facility. It is also feasible that the contamination came from the processing facility and was brought out to the farm, but we prefer to think that it was the origin of the farm, and it is best to think that way when you're looking at contamination of food, because then you have a clearer picture of what's required from cleanup and improved handling and that kind of thing. So the next example, I suppose, that I have, and this is a real case study. There was an issue at a facility with pathogenic E. coli. Cheese was made from milk from different species of animal and was stored in the same room. Pathogenic E. coli were detected in cheese made from the milk of one of those species, but because of the possibilities of cross-contamination, all of the cheese was destroyed, even though none of the cheese from the other two species was tested to see did it have pathogenic E. coli. It was just destroyed because of the risk of cross-contamination. And again, I am aware of small food processing facilities and limitations and all of that, but just to try and think that if you are making cheese or some other product with milk from different sources, try to keep the manufacturing and storage completely separate, so that if there is an issue, then the destruction of the product can be minimized to the product from the species where it was actually found. And then you kind of avoid the whole issue of the possibility of cross-contamination. And again, I say this case that I was dealing with was applied to cheese, but it could equally apply to other products. So just think about keeping sources, different sources, milk sources, just keep them separate and document that they are separate, so that if it comes down to it, you can show the authorities that your production system for products from different milks is actually separate. Toxin producing Staph aureus, again, this was to do with the toxin producing Staph aureus, not necessarily to do with toxin, but the presence of the toxin producing Staph aureus in a cheese can lead to the production of toxin and food poisoning issues, as Linda had demonstrated. So we found toxin producing Staph aureus in a cheese. That could be from a human source, or it could be from bovine, because it was bovine cheese, bovine milk cheese. It could be from bovine source as well. So we have to distinguish between the two. We did some sampling and of the milk from the piping system that's between the cows and the cheese vat, and we identified the pipes as the source of the Staph aureus. So again, cleaning of the pipes resolved the issue. Again, I think Eddie might talk a little bit about biofilm and scale building up on pipes, and despite normal cleaning processes, biofilm can build up on the inside of pipes. So you need to be particularly aware of the cleaning processes within the piping system to keep it clean and prevent the contamination. So once there was a cleaning of pipes, that resolved the issue with regard to the occurrence of toxin-producing Staph aureus in the cheese. Again, we come back to Listeria monocytogenes, and it's amazing, I suppose, in the sense that this one slide that I'm showing you was developed over probably about 10 years and a couple of thousand samples. So there's a lot of data behind this one slide, and I'm not going to go into that in any way. But on the left-hand part of the slide, you can see that there was a mild detergent used in a processing facility at the beginning, and the reason for that, there was a valid reason for that. It was that the environment and the bacteria in the environment were a help in developing the ripening of a cheese. So if you use if you use a strong detergent, it would interfere with the ripening process. So a mild detergent was used, and you can see that there were a number of positive cases of Listeria monocytogenes. I haven't actually shown the actual number, I've just indicated a high number. It's an the 20 on that axis is an arbitrary value, but it certainly, without counting the sample, there was a high occurrence of Listeria monocytogenes in the processing environment. So the food business owners started to use a strong detergent, which led to the elimination of the Listeria monocytogenes from the processing environment, and there were over a number of years, and that absence of Listeria with the strong detergent, that went on for a number of years. I only showed it as a simple point on the graph here, but that did last for a couple of years. And after a couple of years, the food business owner began to think, well, we have no Listeria monocytogenes, can't we go back to using a mild detergent again? And they changed the process, and lo and behold, the Listeria started to come back again. Didn't let it go on for too long, so the number of positive samples was a bit less when they started using the mild detergent again, and that only happened for a month or two. And when the Listeria started to appear again, certainly switched back very quickly to the strong detergent again. And when I say strong detergent, it's something like a chlorinated caustic for cleaning purposes. And again, in the next presentation, Eddie will talk a bit more about that. But what it does show is that changing the detergent from one to the other can have an influence on the occurrence of Listeria. And if you're doing something right in terms of keeping Listeria absent, then there's no need to change. As they say, if you're winning, why change the team? So stick with what works, because if you deviate from that and start doing things a little bit less, the chances are that Listeria or other food poisoning bacteria could return to the premises. So they're just some of the issues that I had over the number of years with regard to food poisoning bacteria. In all cases, the resolution didn't involve extensive expenditure on equipment or facilities, and I don't think that huge expense should go into that kind of equipment. You can absolutely, if it's needed, but attention to detail in the practices that are fairly basic can have a huge impact. And I think that, as Linda kind of implied, the lessons we've all learned from coronavirus over the last year, I do hope that they continue over the next few years, that the basic measures can be very effective. So the implementation of practices and procedures. There's no point in having a BRC manual stuck up on the shelf and not looking at it. I think that practices need to be implemented, and if they're written down, then they're needed to be written down, but they are also needed to be implemented. Things like awareness of issues related to food poisoning bacteria, attention to detail in cleaning, and as I say, just to look at workflows in terms of people, but also in terms of product, and ensure that they're as efficient as possible and as food safety friendly as possible. And as highlighted in the last slide, then you've got detergent selection can be very important. And Ed will talk a bit more about detergent selection and different detergents for different reasons and that kind of thing. But all of this is within the ability of management to a large extent. I know there are cases when it's not, but a lot of issues can be addressed within the ability of management of a facility. So thank you very much for your attention. As Linda was saying, questions, we'll have a question and answer session at the end. And for the moment, I will hand you over to Ed O'Neill that will tell you a little bit about how to get rid of the food poisoning issues that I've highlighted. Thank you.
Thank you, Kieran. Can you stop sharing there, please? Thank you, Kieran. Right, can you see that? Yes. Good morning all, and thank you very much, Kieran, Linda, and Mairead for your generous introduction. Cleaning and hygiene for food SMEs. It's an area where a lot of small companies fall down, and it's an area that demands very close attention. And, oh dear, that's not working. That's not working. Excuse me a moment, I'm going to stop sharing. And now I'm going to share again, so please bear with me just for a moment. And lovely, lovely. Now we have action, right? So there's various aspects of cleaning. Food manufacturers are obliged to maintain high hygienic standards. It not only applies to plant and equipment, but also to the staff in the production facility. Whether you're a very small deli or whether you're a larger food production company, all of these are very, very important. When I walk into a food premises to evaluate them for cleaning and hygiene, first impressions are everything. Now, this slide is absolutely perfect. It's a brand new facility, so it's a little bit unfair. But again, you know, your visual appearance is very, very important. Generally speaking, if something looks really clean, it generally is clean. And people have gone to the bother of going through the cleaning and hygiene process in a proper fashion and a clear and defined manner. But why do we need cleaning? Or why do we be involved in cleaning? And basically, there's the trade side, there's an issue of trust, and there's the legal side. Food residues provide an environment where bugs or microorganisms can grow, and therefore they must be eliminated. And they must be eliminated to reduce the risk of food spoilage and food poisoning, to allow for the disinfection of equipment and work surfaces, to reduce the potential contamination by foreign matter, and to promote a hygienic and well-run image to customers. Good wholesome products that keep well and free from hazards are good for trade. Customers will buy time and time again. But the reverse is also true. If the product is contaminated, then this can be very, very damaging. And the potential effects of poor cleaning and poor standards must be kept in mind at all times. There's the issue of trust. When customers never see, generally speaking, never see the inside of a factory or how the product is produced and how it's handled. The photograph at the bottom corner there is a system actually in Moorpark technology, where the product is filled automatically into small little pouches on a roll, all very, very high tech, all very, very clean and very proper. And this is what the public expect, your customers expect this to be taking place. They take the company on its reputation and they trust that that company is doing everything by the book, so to speak. They take for granted that food is produced under clean, hygienic conditions by very well-trained staff. And on the legal side, it's there to protect the consumer in terms of food hygiene and food safety, And it's down to the FBO, the food business operator, to be aware of the legislation, to be aware of these legal obligations, because it can prove very, very costly. The last thing you want is a product recall. The last thing you want is somebody getting ill from something produced by you in your premises. And as always, prevention is better than cure. Excuse me. Instructing people when it comes to cleaning is never enough. In order to maintain high standards, they must understand the reasons why cleaning is so important. It's often seen as a necessary evil because there's a cost involved. Cleaning chemicals and equipment all cost money, and this is something we have to do. In addition, we can't see yeasts, molds, bacteria, and so forth. And because we can't see them, it's very, very difficult to understand the necessity to do what we need to do in terms of cleaning and hygiene. As I said, it costs money. There's a cost of labor, there's water supply, possible water treatment, heating of the water, there's the actual cleaning equipment, there's the chemical usage, then there's the effluent on the far side, and then there's the downtime. Most equipment works very, very well the longer it's running, but it has to have a downtime in between runs or possibly in between flavors and so forth. And all of that costs money. So you have to be clear and defined as to what you're trying to do, to educate your staff, the reasons why you're doing this and so forth, and the reasons why you must get it right first time, every time. Additional reasons then would be reduce the risk of food safety hazards, including cross-contamination, foreign body contamination, to meet specific customer requirements, maintain product shelf life. Often we get queries about how can we extend the shelf life of various products, be it meats, dairy products, and so forth. And a lot of product shelf life extension is down to cleaning and hygiene on the ground, on the factory floor. And also, very, very important is the last line, to ensure safe working conditions for staff. So if a plant is cleaned properly, it won't have slippery floors, and so there's no danger to staff falling, slipping, causing injury, and so forth. There's different types of cleaning. Physical cleaning is about removing all visible dirt, so you clean as you go, all right? Chemical cleaning is about the removal of microscopic residues, and bacterial cleaning is attained by the disinfection of the work surfaces. And the nature of soiling, it's very, very hard to get home to people that there's organic, inorganic, and biofilms. Organic is about fat, protein, starch. They may be cooked, they may have hard deposits, and generally speaking, very, very difficult to remove. If we look at something like a yogurt contains, generally speaking, contains fat, protein, sugars in the form of milk sugar, and fruit sugars. And these carbohydrates, the sugar, they're generally speaking very easy to remove. But the organic ones are not. On the inorganic side, we have calcium deposits, phosphate deposits, and so forth, hard mineral deposits. And the biofilms, we will touch on those a little later. Fats, oils, and greases, they vary from waxy solids to very heavy liquids. Lots of fat in meats, fish, nuts. Hazelnuts contain about 65% fat. Cheeses, depending on the type, can be high fat, low fat, and so forth. So fat is everywhere in all the food products that we use. And it's very, very important for flavor. It's very important for fat-soluble vitamins. But it can be insoluble in water. On exposure to air, fats, oils, and greases can oxidize. And again, they can also polymerize, creating harder, more closely bonded units on the surface. Exposure to high temperatures can cause burn-on or the fats to carbonize. And they're recognizable by their greasy feel and water-repellent properties. I was in a factory recently who had some issues with shelf life. And when I walked into the factory itself, there was a sheen on the factory floor. And straight away, the ears went up and sort of, what's going on here? And basically, it all boiled down to somebody making a decision that we're going to save a few bob, so we'll use cold water to wash down everything, and we won't use warm or hot water. And the cold water was literally, okay, rinsing down tanks and so forth, but fats were layered on the work surface. And you could see when you walked in, horrible situation to be in. We had to change the clean regime straight away. Why did this happen? Because somebody got a mad notion that this will save money in the short term, might be a great fella and so forth. Proteins, complex large molecules, and very, very difficult to remove from food systems. They can change when exposed to high temperatures, makes them difficult to remove, and it could also make them harder and more insoluble. The correct temperature for removal of proteins then is critical and very, very important. Aged protein deposits are extremely difficult to remove. And then many allergens are proteins. And I'm mentioning allergens today, even though my colleague in safefood, James McIntosh, is an expert in this area, but I'm touching on it purely because almost all allergens, apart from sulfur dioxide, are protein in nature. All right. It's very, very important to realize that allergens are proteins, are normal constituents of food. They are not another form of food poisoning. Allergens cannot be eliminated by baking or cooking. In fact, that sometimes makes them more allergenic. Intolerance reactions can also be triggered by other food constituents, such as lactose. And allergens should be controlled based on firm HACCP principles. But because they are protein in nature, it's important to be aware of how difficult they are to clean and the potential they have for cross-contamination. Starches are large molecules, long chains of sugars, and they can be insoluble, especially after exposure to heat, usually derived from plants. And when deposited, they can vary from soft powdery to quite hard. Some can be rinsed off quite easily, but if there's a heating process, they can be very, very difficult to remove. And of course, yeast and molds then, not an issue in terms of food safety, but they are issues in terms of food quality, shelf life, very, very common in the environment. They're quite large yeast and molds related to bacteria. They're found in moist areas, especially where high levels of sugars are present, such as flowers, nectar, and things like that. Mold found in moist areas, especially near chills and freezers, silicon sealants. And if we're face to face in a classroom situation, I would ask you to put up your hands and say, how many people have seen little black dots in their fridge? And I certainly, for one, have. If you actually allow them to grow, they're not black, but they're actually dark green in color. And they're cute little fellas under a microscope, sort of rugby football shaped. But they take many forms and shapes. But again, what we use yeast and molds for, we use them in yogurt production, cheese production. We use them in bread making, things like that. And they are very, very common in the atmosphere. But in terms of food areas and shelf life and quality, we tend to use yeast and molds as indicator organisms. So if your yeast and mold is high in the atmosphere, it means there's something wrong with your cleaning schedule in your plant itself. So while these specific bugs are not dangerous in terms of food safety, they are very, very good indicators of a good or a poor cleaning regime. Before we move on to cleaning agents and the type of soil, I'd like to go back a step when we talk about fats and proteins. And outside today, we have a beautiful day, about 16 degrees forecast later on. And from now on, hopefully we'll get to drive a bit more than we have been. And when we are driving, we get lots of bugs hitting our windscreen, our grills, and the front of our cars. And they're extremely difficult to remove. And why are they extremely difficult to remove? Because they're made up of fat and protein, right? Fat and protein. So in order to remove them, we bring our car to the car wash. And the first thing we do is we take out our lance and we hose down whatever debris we can get off. and then we put on a foam cleaner, and that bubbles away and it helps to remove some more stuff. And then we get out the brush and we do manual cleaning to get rid of all the visible dirt or soil. And then we rinse down, and then we put on a protective wax layer. In terms of the food industry, instead of a protective wax layer, we spray on a sanitizer. And we'll talk about that later on. But the idea of the car is a very, very good analogy in terms of how difficult it is to clean properly and get it right every time. And also the difference in me and somebody else doing the same job. Will we get the car clean to the same extent? And the same goes for the factory situation. So we have to have clean and defined cleaning programs that everybody can follow, no matter who's working on the cleaning schedule that day. So the cleaning agents take many forms. Generally speaking, detergents. So on the organic side, we've already mentioned we have fats, we have proteins, we have starches. And generally speaking, we use an alkaline detergent to remove these. In the case of proteins, we often use a chlorinated alkaline detergent because they are very, very difficult to actually remove. Alkaline detergents, high pH from 8 to 14, combination of chemicals, including surfactants and sometimes chlorine. And blends are much more effective. They are more expensive, but they will do a much, much better job than individual units on their own. Surfactants are very, very important. You often hear the term anionic, which are negatively charged, cationic, positively charged, and then maybe amphoteric, which are neutral charge, or they're also called zwitterionic or zwitterionic. They improve the wetting power by reducing surface tension. They change the chemical charge on proteins, making them more soluble. They allow water to get into to penetrate the soil and give a greater cleaning action. They also prevent redepositing in your system by keeping the soil in suspension. So they have a water-loving side and a water-hating side. But very, very important, surfactants are very, very important in terms of getting a proper cleaning regime. On the inorganic side, which is mineral deposits such as calcium, phosphorus, in the form of limescale. And to remove that, we use acids, and the acids, generally speaking, contain chelating agents. And again, usually organic acids, but it can also be sulfuric acid and so forth. You have to be very, very careful to follow the manufacturer's instructions. The great thing about acid cleaning is that it's not only about limescale, but also very, very important in that it's very, very good at killing thermogenic microorganisms. And these are organisms that have the ability to survive pasteurization, and very, very critical in the dairy industry. So acid washing is not only about limescale, it's also about microorganism kill-off. Acid detergents, again, 0 to 6 pH, may have chelating agents added. They're effective at removing scale, excuse me, but they should not be allowed to come into contact with chlorinated detergents because there's a danger of the release of chlorine gas. Where I used to work in my former life a few months ago in Moore Park, we have our detergents stored and we have a tank around them so that if they do leak, the leak is kept in that immediate area. Very, very important to have your chemicals stored separately in terms of acid, alkaline, and so forth. Chelating agents comes from the Greek meaning claw. They grab on to metal ions, okay? And they remove inorganic elements. They prevent hard scale deposits. They're added to acid detergents in small quantities. They keep these metal ions in suspension and they allow for effective cleaning. So chelating agents are very, very important. Examples would be sodium gluconate, EDTA, ethylene diamine tetracetic acid, I think that's the word. And again, very, very important in that they grab onto the metal ions, they keep them in suspension, and they do a much better job in terms of removing water hardness, or removing limescale and things like that. We briefly mentioned biofilms early on, and they're a huge problem in the food industry in general. Some bacteria, generally speaking, not pathogenic, not disease-causing bacteria, they produce things like polysaccharides, long chains of sugars. And these have the potential to combine with salts and to create biofilms. But what happens then is that other bacteria have the ability then to grow inside these protected films. They're tenacious, very, very difficult to remove. And that's why the proper detergent at the proper temperature is absolutely critical to ensuring a clean regime. Followed by, if we disrupt these little sacs or these little films, biofilms, then it's important that we move in with a proper sanitizer to kill off any vegetative organisms that may be there. Again, biofilms, they're not going to be sitting up in front of you looking at you, right? They're almost impossible to see. You will find them underneath tables, you'll find them underneath stairs, steps, you'll find them on wheels, you find them where cleaning hasn't been done properly. You'll find them in drains, showers, and so forth. And as I said, they have the ability to harbor microorganisms, which can in time result in spikes in general micro testing, or more importantly, in something like Listeria contamination. So very, very important to be aware of this and how we actually remove them. Often the question is asked, what's a disinfectant, what's a sanitizer? Basically, sanitizers are about reducing the number of microorganisms to safe levels, such as chlorinated detergent, such as peracetic acid. A disinfectant, and a disinfectant, sanitizer. A disinfectant then will kill microorganisms, such as QATs, quaternary ammonium compounds. They're the most common disinfectant used in food industry in Ireland. The second one, peracetic acid, is my favorite. I've been using it for a number of years, an organic acid, but very, very strong oxidizing agent. And in work that myself and Kieran have did, and he spoke about it in his earlier slides, in terms of reducing the numbers of Listeria, I have found in my experience that peracetic acid as a terminal disinfectant is incredibly good for all aspects of food environments, but it must be preceded rather by proper cleaning with a proper detergent. It's no use coming in with a spray bottle of peracetic acid and spraying it around if the surfaces have not been cleaned in the first place. And in my experience, it's one of the best. Quaternary ammonium compounds, very, very good. The most common disinfectant used in the country, as I've said. And it contains, a lot of them contains an ingredient called benzyl chlorine chloride, or BAC, B-A-C. And this is a cationic or positively charged detergent and or disinfectant rather. And it's used a lot in hand sanitizers. You see them in hospitals more so than for the general public in that. So QATs are very, very good. Peracetic acid just goes a step beyond that. Halogens, chlorine, iodine. Iodine, not so much nowadays. It's been taken over by peracetic acid, but in the past, I have used iodine baths to store removable equipment, such as filling heads, removable pipework, and they're stored overnight in an iodophor or an iodine solution, right? And as the slide suggests, clean first, disinfect second. Peracetic acid is an ORC, ORC, or an oxygen-releasing compound. There's quaternary ammonium compound, or QATs, and I briefly mentioned amphoteric, very, very little usage nowadays. But these are all perfectly good disinfectants. Chlorine is not as popular as it once was. It's very, very aggressive. It can damage metalwork if used excessively. But also people are very, very concerned about chlorine compounds showing their heads in products, especially in dairy products, okay? So the reduction of chlorine has been massive over the last number of years, but then the increasing use of peracetic acid has been fantastic. Again, choosing the appropriate detergent is very, very important. For fat, again, we mentioned an alkali detergent. For protein, a chlorinated alkaline. For starch, alkaline, and for minerals, acid-containing chelated agents. Fat has a broad melting range, but it's not fully melted until about 40 degrees centigrade. Alkaline detergents, they saponify the fat and remove it, but it's critical that the wash water should be just above 50 degrees. I like 55. If it's too cold, it will smear, provide anchor points for what we said earlier on, biofilms. Proteins are removed from surfaces during chlorinated alkalis, right? And surfactants then make the detergent stronger by changing the electrical charge of the protein, making them easier to remove. So again, it's important here that when you're purchasing detergents, that you get a complete brief by the company, whether it's BioCell or whomever, right, as to why are we using a product called lactol, or why are we using a product called AMC, and so forth. What does it do? What temperature do I need to use it at? And so forth. What concentration and how long? Washing factors for me is all about tact. Time, action, concentration, temperature. Time, not enough surface interaction. Detergent may deposit from cooling. Just right, you get the surface wet, the soil is removed, and it's washed away. Action is about mechanical force. It can be a brush in your hand. It can be several forms like that, but it can be also bubble formation in foaming. It loosens soils. It also disrupts biofilms, and very, very important to get the action correct. Chemical concentration. If you don't have enough, you won't have enough cleaning hit or cleaning power. Too much is often the greater mistake that people do. It leaves residues, increase costs, and can reduce efficiency. Get it right according to the manufacturer's instructions. It does the job required, does what it says on the tin. In terms of temperature, use the correct temperature according to your operating practices and your cleaning supplier recommendations. Water should be around the 50-55 degree mark. Too hot, proteins may denature and may deposit, which is also dangerous. Another thing that should be considered, if you go to temperatures like 65, often people presume the higher you go, the better the cleaning power. Not necessarily true. If you go to temperatures in excess of 60 degrees, a lot of pipe work in industry, certainly in the small to medium, large scale companies, they have rubber O-rings, right, made from butyl rubber. These are very, very susceptible to acid washing at temperatures above 60 degrees. It can result in their degradation. Physically, you can see little black dots in your product. You don't want that. But on a microbiological side, it can result in cracking and fraying of the actual O-ring itself. And that can be a base then for bacteria to be resident, set up home, as it were, and then contaminate product passing through the pipework afterwards. So again, very, very important that the correct temperature is used. Very straightforward cleaning steps. Pre-rinse, remove loose soil prior to cleaning, use warm water. Wash then according to time, action, concentration, temperature. You remove your organic or inorganic material. You follow your standard operating practices. Post-rinse then, that removes your cleaning chemicals. Rinse water can sometimes be acidified. And sanitize then. This reduces the number of microorganisms, but only clean surfaces can actually be sanitized. Again, manual cleaning is about getting your hands in there. You know, it could be as simple as cleaning floors like the slide on the right-hand side. Foam cleaning is commonly used in industry. The really good part about foam cleaning is the bubbles perform a mechanical action which help to remove debris, but you can very clearly see where you've been foaming. Okay, then it must be rinsed off, and fogging is commonly used in an awful lot of food industry premises, usually on a Friday evening, Saturday, when production is finished, and it throws up a mist, usually of quaternary ammonium compounds, into the air. They get into nooks and crannies, but again, fogging is only done after cleaning has taken place. It's an extra step in the cleaning process. Is it necessary? If your cleaning is being done properly, possibly not. I like to recommend fogging if somebody has a problem once a month. You can bring it back to once every fortnight, once every week, until you attain a balance where you have very good shelf life, no contamination, no cross-contamination, and so forth. But it can be a great tool in terms of ensuring that the entire processing hall, packaging hall is totally and utterly clean. Cleaning in place then refers to most larger companies. It's the interior cleaning of the pipes, usually done in a programmed cycle, and you want a turbulent flow of about 1.5 to 2 meters per second going through your pipes. And this turbulent flow has in itself a mechanical action, and it cleans the internal surfaces of your pipework so that for your next run of milk or beer or whatever it is, the pipework is clean. Validation is very important. It's no use going through everything we've spoken about unless it's documented the actual, or you document the actual cleaning procedure, that you have a clear cleaning schedule and that you adhere to it. And then there's monitoring checks. Most of them are visual, but I also use ATP a lot. You can get a swab and you can swab the water coming through pipework. You can swab work surfaces, and ATP is adenosine triphosphate. It's an organic material. So if you have any organic material present, it will show up in your meter. It's a 3-minute test. The machine costs a few grand. But for me, depending on the size of your operation, absolutely necessary piece of equipment. It's also an indicator then, is your cleaning procedures working? Again, train your employees, explain to them, right? We are not all wizards. You set foot on the factory floor, you need to be educated, and this education needs to be ongoing. Why are we using chemicals? What is this detergent? One of the instances that started out this program was myself and Kieran Jordon working with a number of food companies throughout the country in terms of, it could have been Listeria or it could have been spikes in other microorganisms. And in many of the companies, when we went to visit them, they actually weren't able to tell us what cleaning chemicals they were using. They can give us a name, but they actually didn't know what was in the compound, which I felt was absolutely criminal. Again, train your employees, but know exactly why you're cleaning, how you're cleaning, and the reasons for cleaning. Above all, retain complete records because you may need them down the line. Equipment should be color-coded. No crossover from high risk to low risk. Generally speaking, red and blue are used in the food industry, red and high risk and so forth. Very easy to see. And then up on a wall, away off the floor, they're stored. Very, very clear for everybody to see and so forth, but very, very straightforward. Just popped in this slide in relation to COVID. One of the problems we have at the moment, anybody who visits the food factory, your temperature is taken straight away, there or there, and you fill in forms, have you been in contact with anybody, any COVID in the family, etc., right? The danger is that we throw people into the COVID side and we forget, you know, the quality side that they may have been working in, and we might end up a little bit short on the quality side. Don't forget what served us well in the past, and that is a clean regime. And as I said previously, get it right first time, every time. And then there's just a few key points. Clean surfaces are necessary to ensure satisfactory disinfection. Facilities and equipment must be adequate to do the job effectively. The efficacy of disinfectants depends on the chemical composition, on the time they're allowed to do their job, and the temperature at which they're used. And each disinfectant has its own unique properties. Protocols must be in place for all cleaning and disinfection. Chemicals must be used and stored safely. Try to use a combination of detergent sanitizers rather than separate chemicals. In the long term, it actually saves time and money. Keep the number of chemicals to a minimum and avoid cross-contamination. Never mix chemicals. They may become neutralized or they may become toxic. And there's a number of links, a number of videos put up online by safefood on cleaning of equipment, excellent videos on hand washing, and these are all wonderful tools for staff. And then the final link is one that we've done in Moore Park along with safefood, and it's about foaming, effective cleaning in the factory hall or in the food processing hall and so forth. Thank you very much for your time.
Thanks very much, Ed. Thanks for that.
Okay, stop sharing.
And thanks to Linda and Kieran also for giving us great presentations, very informative and very interesting. So I suppose, as I said at the start, if you've got any questions, please get typing them in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen now, and we'll make the most of all the expertise we have in front of us. So we have a number of questions in already, so I'll kick off the Q&A session. Just, I suppose this is towards Eddie, I suppose. Just, Eddie, in terms of COVID-19, the COVID-19 pandemic, is there any changes that food business should be making to their cleaning regime?
No, there's no changes. What you're doing all the time is perfectly adequate. But what we're finding is, because people are concentrating on individuals and staff members within the plant in terms of taking temperatures, filling in forms every morning, that sometimes they're getting a bit lax on doing the everyday stuff that has served us well in the past. And that's the only danger. But there's no extra cleaning you need to do because of potential COVID contamination, none whatsoever.
Okay. We have lots of cleaning questions, Eddie. You'll be taking lots of cleaning questions. Let me see the next one here. What would be the best cleaning agents for getting rid of Listeria? Kieran mentioned one containing hydrogen peroxide. Is there a better one than that?
Peracetic acid is a blend of hydrogen peroxide and acetic acid. Okay. As I mentioned, peracetic acid. One of the commercial names is a product called Serpent, S-E-R-P-E-N-T, and is used in the dairy industry as a sanitizer after cleaning. But remember, again, sanitizers are only good if you've cleaned properly in the first place.
Perfect. We have another question here. Just this is a straightforward question. What is meant by a food grade cleaning agent?
They're all food grade, actually. They're all food grade. If you go to whatever cleaning company you're using, each product, you ask for their specification, right? And they will have a sheet with them, whether it's a food ingredient or a cleaning agent. They actually have a document with them, and that document should be held as part of your HACCP quality manual.
Perfect. Someone has, well, it's more of a comment, but a question maybe, that they've installed a Dyson hand dryer in their washrooms as they wanted to reduce the amount of hand towels being sent to landfill. They're saying the instruction book says Dyson is safe in the food industry, and I suppose their question is it? Or do you think it is?
Kieran is ready to jump in on that one. Do you want to take that one, Kieran?
Well, the two of us can give our tuppence worth, and hopefully we'll be the same. Despite the requirement for less landfill, I think that paper towels and a covered bin with a foot pedal are the way to go. From a food safety point of view, the old hand dryers with the air blowing down are definitely circulating whatever bacteria are in the environment, whether they be good or bad. the old hand dryers were just circulating those and taking them up off surfaces into the air. The Dyson ones, where you get a lateral flow, are a bit better. To be honest, my critical self would say, well, what else would the manufacturers say if they had an opportunity to increase sales? But yeah, the Dysons are a bit better, but there's still airflow increase with regard to it. As I say, I would prefer myself to have paper towels and a covered bin with a foot pedal. Ed.
I can just go a little stage further than that, and I slightly disagree with Kieran, right? On the hand dryers where you put your hands in, let's call them the D word, right? And you put your hands in. If you notice over time, when you look inside those, you'll actually see dirt on the bottom of them, right? So if your hands are not cleaned properly, right? Kieran is very, very correct. You're forming an aerosol into the air. So are you guaranteed that the hands are cleaned properly in the first place? But if you look at those dryers over time, they actually need to be cleaned themselves inside, because you'll see a film on the bottom of them. I'm 100% behind Kieran. I'm a paper towel man, and dispose it.
Perfect.
And can I also add, just have a look further to what Ed had said. If you have a look at the water drips from the end of them and the tray that some people put at the bottom of it to collect water that drips down from them, they're actually filthy dirty. So yeah.
Yeah, I've seen them. They are pretty all right. Okay, another question on peracetic acid. Is peracetic acid a final rinse, or does it need to be rinsed off?
Some people rinse it off, but some people leave it on. It degrades down into water and acetic acid. You don't want to taint your food products, okay? And you have to remember, if you're in the dairy industry and you're making yogurt, right? There will be a residual biocidal effect, okay? So then I would definitely rinse off. If I was putting it on table surfaces, no, I wouldn't rinse off. You know, but if you're looking at whether it's quaternary compounds or whether it's peracetic acid, if it's inside in a tank, definitely rinse out, because there will be potentially a biocidal effect, that kind of a detrimental effect on yogurt cultures, cheese cultures, and so forth, right? But on work surfaces, no, I don't wash off.
Perfect. Someone has, I don't know if this was touched on, but someone's asked a question on shelf life. What shelf life can you give to foods preserved by modified atmosphere packaging without shelf life testing?
You see, that's a nightmare. First of all, what type of food? If that individual wants to email me privately, I'd gladly deal with that query. Is that okay?
Yeah, perfect. Thought that would have been funny one. Now, let me see. How important is it to wash vegetables from suppliers into restaurants and segregate these during storage?
Linda?
Yeah, I would say it's very important to wash vegetables. Kieran, I'm sure, will have an opinion on that as well. But particularly things like root vegetables that have come from the ground should always be thoroughly washed. You might be getting some that have had some kind of a pre-wash, but I would be washing salad vegetables. Obviously, the level of, it will depend. Some vegetables you'll be cooking and others you might be putting into salads. Obviously, if you're putting it into prepared salad, it is important to wash vegetables. In terms of storing them separately, again, it's about preventing them from being contaminated from anything else. They may or may not be, it depends whether they're ready to eat or not. But yeah, any different food types that you get in really should be stored separately and in a way that they're secure and they're not coming into contact with other foods, so they can't become contaminated or contaminate anything else. So separate storage facilities are important. Kieran, do you have anything you might agree or disagree with me?
Don't have anything much to add to that, I suppose, except I would agree with it fully. And I'd also just add to that that's something that should be considered in terms of workflow. so that the final washed product and produced product doesn't come in contact with the raw material that's just coming in, because you can get cross-contamination. But yeah, I'd agree absolutely with Linda on that.
Perfect. Someone's just asked, could you give an example of a good cleaning regime and products to use? I don't know how.
Again, that's one for an email.
Yeah.
That's one for an email. If somebody wants to email in, I'd gladly handle that. It would just take an age and a half.
And I actually think the next one might be a email into what length of time, or sorry, would the length of time I cool my food at room temperature affect the shelf life of the food? But obviously that depends on the food, and you know. So
some foods require slow cooling in order to get the texture correct, right? But I presume the food has already been packed and so forth. But again, I can help with that one if you want to pass on my email details.
Perfect. Thank you, Eddie and Kieran, and thanks, Linda, for giving us all the information in the Q&A session. And I suppose just to say to everyone, thanks for attending, and that the webinar recording will be available on the Safe Food Knowledge Network website shortly. And if you haven't already signed up, you can sign up for free at safefoodkn.net. And also just all participants will be sent a link to the webinar then, and a link to our feedback form. And we would really appreciate if you take a few minutes to fill it out, because it does inform our future events. And anything else, Tracy, that I have forgotten?
No, you've covered it all, Marie. Thanks very much.
Okay.
But I add in that I think I put my email address at the end of the presentation. If anybody wants to contact me with any specific questions with regard to foodborne bacteria, I can attempt to answer them, or I might be able to pass you on to somebody else who might be able to give a better answer. So feel free to contact me.
Thanks, Kieran. Eddie, if you don't mind, we might send your email addresses
With
out
the link.
when we send it. Yeah, when we send
lovely,
out everything.
lovely, no problem, no problem.
Yes, and just I suppose part 2 of this series is next week it's on Monday the 26th, isn't it, Tracy?
It is correct, yeah.
So, and it's on HAZUP and record keeping. So if anyone wants to sign up for that, go ahead to the Knowledge Network website, and you can.
We can also send the link to that on the.
That's a good idea.
So you can register for that event. Perfect. Then. Great.
Okay, thanks, guys.
Thanks everyone for joining us today. Please join us the next time, and if you'd send us your feedback, we'd be grateful. Thank you, everyone. All the best. Bye bye.